Good afternoon for us East Coasters and good evening for those calling in from the UK. My name is Alexa Clay. I'm the director of RSA US. And on behalf of Octavia Margie and RSA US, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this month's US Salon, Providing Healing, Promoting Hope. Before we get started, I'd like to give a little background on the RSA US, and just cover some ground rules for today's event. Founded in the UK, RSA stands for the Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufacturers, and Commerce. We've been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. And today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven think tank committed to providing an independent platform for research and debate on contemporary issues and topics. Our origins are really in the coffee house spirit of the British Enlightenment. And so that's really the vibe that we wanted to enroll you in today, how we could bring some of that spirit of informality into today's conversation. And so the Salon series is an important part of that. It's an opportunity for us to speak and dialogue with other fellows and hear from really experts in the field and thought leaders on a wide variety of topics. Currently, we have over 30,000 fellows that are spread out across the globe, and around 1,000 of those live and work here in the US, including Octavia, who's run a number of these events with us. RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities across the United States and with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to our event moderator, Octavia, I just wanted to cover some ground rules about the event today. The event is being recorded, so if you do want to change your name or appear more anonymously, you can do that. You can just have your first name and initial, identifying who you are. We also all are coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different disciplines here. So if there's something that is unfamiliar in terms of terminology that's brought up, please do feel free to ask questions. And of course, be respectful. Everyone is coming here with different viewpoints, so do use language that your mother or mom would approve of. And then feel free to pose any questions, comments throughout this conversation in the chat function. We're going to have a lot of time for Q&A towards the end, but we're going to have a hard stop probably a few minutes before the hour. So do post any questions here for our speaker or any comments as you hear some of the remarks. Great. So now I'm going to hand over to Octavia, who's been running these events through on behalf of RSA US. Octavia is an author, career coach, and the founder of 2010 Agency. She's also just recently published a book, which I've been tracking your progress on LinkedIn, Octavia, and it's amazing to see how well you've been doing. The book is called Prep, Push, Pivot, Essential Career Strategies for Underrepresented Women, and it's been heralded by Cosmopolitan, Refinery 29 as one of the most recommended books of the year. So do check out that book if you haven't already. It's been wonderful to see Octavia's work in Fast Company, in Harvard Business Review, Forbes. She's been a wonderful speaker and advocate on a whole range of issues. And so really appreciate your presence here. Octavia, I'll hand over to you. And if you want to introduce our speaker, that would be wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much, Alexa. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I've been a fellow of the RSA for over a decade now, and I lead the Gender Equity Network here in the United States. We host these virtual salons to bring people together from inside and outside of the RSA to share perspectives, discuss strategies, and forge connections. Today is the final day of Women's History Month. As we continue to navigate the pandemic and the escalating turmoil of the war in Ukraine, the theme for this year's Women's History Month has recognized the women on the front lines. It shines a spotlight on the women providing healing and hope to our communities. On International Women's Day, the Chief Diversity Officer of Korn, Ferry, the global management consulting firm, said this: when pressed, even most men will agree that women carried society through the pandemic, providing billions of hours of childcare, education, and caretaking, all while holding down jobs or having to leave those jobs, and they have not yet recovered. Study after study shows work-related stress levels for women are off the charts. And on top of this, a study by Maven found that working women are 23% more likely to burn out than men. Today, we're going to discuss what to do when everything feels overwhelming with our special guest, Dr. Margie Warrell. We'll be discussing how to deal with anxiety, how to identify and unleash our potential, and how to harness creativity and courage to thrive while in the midst of so much uncertainty. Dr. Margie Warrell is a best-selling author and global leadership authority on building courage for leading change. A senior partner at Korn Ferry's CEO and leadership practice, Margie draws on her diverse global background in business, psychology, and coaching to help people rise to their full potential. Organizations such as NASA, Google, Amazon, Dell, the United Nations Foundation, and Morgan Stanley have trusted her to create transformative programs and accelerate growth. Margie is passionate about empowering women in all spheres. A Women's Economic Forum honoree, she has led brave women's programs around the world. Margie is the author of not one, but 5 best-selling books. You've Got This, Make Your Mark, Brave, Stop Playing Safe, and Find Your Courage. Margie was raised in rural Australia, and she has lived in multiple countries, from Papua New Guinea to Singapore. She's now based in Washington, DC. Margie, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Octavia. It's great to be with you and everyone else. Hello.
So I have a number of questions for Margie, but it's important that we answer all your questions too. So as Alexa said, please do share any questions in the chat and we'll hold space to answer as many as we can. So let's get started. Margie, you started a new job during the pandemic. Can you tell us what attracted you to that opportunity and what it was like to make that transition?
Yeah. No, well, yes. So 24 years ago, I left the corporate world when I was having my first child and I was moving country, and I couldn't see any way to continue on working in a kind of organizational setting. And so a few years after that, moving country again from Papua New Guinea to Australia to the US, I started my own business and second career doing in coaching, and then ultimately leadership development, personal development, a lot in women's leadership. And yes, last year I was approached to join Korn Ferry. And to be honest, I hadn't even considered ever joining another organization, but the opportunity to work with a group of people who have incredible expertise that I can learn from and grow from. So my own growth was part of the decision, and the opportunity to work at the top levels of leadership in big organizations as an amplification of who you impact when working at that level. Both of those things really aligned with my own values and sense of purpose, and that also timing. My kids have left home. I'm no longer moving around the world. And so I just thought, you know what, sometimes the universe conspires for you and doors open you didn't even think of knocking on. And so hence why I've joined Korn Ferry in December as a senior partner working in the leadership development, executive development, particularly at the top C-suite level. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your new role. I'm trying to remember what life was like for us in December. Were you working from home when you started this new role?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, I've been into the office several times. It's not very full. So there's been a lot of Zoom meetings. I have actually been traveling a little bit though with work. And I love to travel. I'm the first to jump on a plane or on a train to New York City. So any opportunity to travel is great with me. And obviously I really believe there's incredible power that comes from connecting with people in person. So given I'm about creating transformational change for people, for me, if there's an opportunity to sit with people in person, I will just jump on that.
So let's talk about change a bit more. This is such a turbulent time. The past 2 years of the pandemic have been a roller coaster, and now we're navigating so much global uncertainty as a result of the escalating situation in Ukraine. What advice do you have for someone listening who really wants to thrive, but is struggling due to so much pressure that feels out of their control?
Well, I think firstly, just talking about those uncertainty factors. Yes, we had the pandemic, we still do, though, obviously we're emerging out of it. It is far, far, far safer. The risk of dying from COVID, if you are vaccinated and you're out in the world, is just so much lower. Yet I think that the pandemic's really magnified people's sensitivity to risk. So there's a lot of people still feeling very anxious, and almost a misplaced fear of the risk factor. So that's something that's really ratcheted up anxiety for some people, not all, but some. And secondly, obviously, what's happening in Ukraine, which is just heart-wrenching, but also has created a huge new uncertainty factor that most of us obviously couldn't have imagined. But I really believe that the fact is life is innately uncertain. We have never had certainty. And it's often when we think back to 2019, think, oh, everything was so certain then. Well, actually it wasn't. There was a lot of uncertainty then too. And I think we have to embrace uncertainty as a norm and not wait until we're feeling like everything is back to normal, because there's never any going back. There's only going forward before we just getting on and living our lives. When I was young growing up, yes, in rural Australia, my dad milked cows for 50 years and we lived on a farming area that was also quite close to the coast. And my dad loved to fish, and we had this little old tin boat and we would go out fishing. And it was rusty and there was holes in it. And I remember on more than one occasion, water would start leaking through the boat. And my dad would say, oh, well, we'll be right. It won't sink before we get back. And we would plug it with blue tack or candy or something. And I remember him saying, boats don't sink because of the water around them. They sink because of the water that gets in them. And I think it's a great metaphor for us in our lives. There is always going to be factors and circumstances around us, things that cause us to feel anxious and uncertain. If you have children, then you have even more reasons like, oh, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong. There is always going to be things that we can focus our attention on that could lead us to feeling really anxious. And instead, we have to be very, very intentional about focusing on look for security within yourself and don't let what's going on around you get inside you to the point that you aren't functioning well. And it's why I believe so strongly in the importance of creating habits and rituals in our lives that allow us as much as possible to bring our best selves to the game, whatever that is. And yeah, I've written about that in books and in my Forbes column and elsewhere. But I think particularly when there's a lot of pressure, and obviously women have carried a disproportionate burden of the caretaking. Suddenly they had to become school teachers overnight back, 2 years ago. We have to be even more intentional about continually doing those small things that help us to be more resilient, that help us to take the pressures in our stride. You've probably heard that saying, it's not the load you carry, it's how you carry it. Yeah. Well, what is it that we can do that helps to broaden our shoulders to carry it better? Because we're always going to carry a load. There's never going to be a day where we're not carrying something. So how do you want to carry it? And a question I love to ask people is like, who are you when you're at your best? And when you're at your best, I'm sure all of you feel optimistic and you're playful and you feel grounded and you're calm and you don't fly off the rails when something small happens. And then, well, what are the things that when you do them help you feel that way more often? And it's the small little things that we do, the small little daily practices and rituals that actually create the biggest results. It's not the going off to, Canyon Ranch, once a year for a 5-day deluxe spa. It's actually how you start your day, how you end your day, the little micro rituals and practices that you take through with you as you go through the day that help you reset and just feel stronger and more grounded and more centered, more connected to others, and really more centered in yourself.
So let's talk a bit more about stress management, because I know I said a few moments ago that for so many of us, our stress levels are off the charts. I know mine have been. And in your book, Make Your Mark, you say, use stress, don't spread it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what you mean and how we can apply that?
Yeah. Well, look, emotions are contagious.
Yes.
And I mean, we witnessed that over the last couple of years. You know, the fear spreads faster than anything else. And we're all susceptible to, but can be the cause of emotional contagion for better or for worse. And so just recognizing that stress is ultimately, there's no such thing as stress as much as people having stressful thoughts that manifest physiologically in feeling uptight and a racing heart and biting your nails and all of those things when we think of as stress. They're the physiological symptoms of stressful thinking. Mm-hmm. And stress, if you kind of boil it down, is our perception of our ability, of our resources to handle what we perceive is going to be required of us. So we think about a big day ahead and go, oh, I feel anxious because it's such a big day I have coming up, or a situation with somebody or something where we're going, oh, I don't know how I'm going to handle that. It's not the event itself, because it may not even happen. It's our perception of our ability to handle it if it did happen. And so just recognizing it begins in our own thinking. That's not to say some situations aren't stressful and stress inducing, but there's a difference between, you know, the stressor and feeling stressed. And I think just starting from that place, recognizing that we have to take ownership of our experience of being stressed and not say, oh, it's because of my boss, my job, my kids, yes, I mean, you look what's going on in Ukraine. There's people there have felt pretty stressed for very understandable reasons. But how do I choose to respond to it? You know, Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, said, you know, between stimulus and response is a space, and in that space is our power to choose. And now that's where our freedom lays. And that's where those little micro rituals can help to step back and go, how do I choose to show up right now? What am I choosing to tell myself about this situation? I know myself, you know, 4 kids. I was living in Singapore at the start of the pandemic. My husband got COVID. He was one of the early cases. He was taken off, hospitalized, locked up for 30 days in Singapore. I was put into a quarantine with one of my children. I had 3 kids in the USA, across the world, 2 of which found themselves homeless because their dorms closed and they couldn't get to Singapore. It had closed its borders. And there was a lot going on. And I just remember, and my book, You've Got This, was literally coming out the week that all of this was happening. It was sort of no irony lost. And it's funny, I've got a copy of it here. And I kept looking at the title and I kept saying to myself, I don't know if you can see that, but
we can't because it's blurry.
Well,
there we go. There we go.
But I kept looking at it and going, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. But multiple times a day, I would just sit there and do some really deep breathing and just feel the ground under my feet and breathe and just come back to the present moment, which the breath does, right? Because in that moment, I was okay. And often our anxiety comes because we project into the future all of the what if bad things we don't want to happen. And we end up living in the very places that we don't want to be. And that fear casting, uncertainty drives us to what's called fear casting. Daniel Gilbert, Albert Harvard coined that term, fear casting. But when there's a lot of uncertainty, our forecasts tend to turn into fear casts, and we come up with all of the worst case scenarios and we terrorize ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so just recognizing, where do you need to reel in your fear casting, that what if this happens and what if that happens, which literally can have us become very paralyzed in stress. And then, of course, there's all the strategies that we need to employ as women too, for setting boundaries and for managing our energy and for managing expectations and saying no to people and opportunities and invites. And I think, you know, which is a whole lot of other things that we can be doing to help us continually kind of operate from a place that's grounded in self-certainty. When there's a lot of things uncertain around me, I know I'm certain that one moment at a time I can handle whatever's coming at me.
So I will want to ask you about boundaries. So I'd love to hold that thought. But before I get into that, hearing what you experienced 2 years ago a husband in hospital with COVID, your family was displaced. It really resonated with me. And I know so many of us have been struggling and are struggling. Margie, do you think it's okay to show vulnerability in the workplace?
Yeah, it's through our vulnerability that we, one, connect to our own greatest strength, and two, connect with others in meaningful ways. And I not only think it's okay to show vulnerability, it's important. It's actually crucial to show vulnerability. Not all times, and not for the sake of it. It's not about crying with everyone all day. You know, I'm vulnerable, which is almost a forced and, in a sense, a manipulative vulnerability. But I'm talking about just being real. Just being real. You know, how are you? You know what? I'm okay, but man, you know, I'm struggling too. You know, you can be, I'm okay and I'm struggling. Or for me, I remember actually the day after Andrew was hospitalized, I was feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I decided to just get on Facebook, and I recorded a Facebook Live, and I just shared with people what had happened, because I wanted support. And I knew that people would rally and make me feel supported, but I knew that I needed support, because social connection, we build resilience through social connection. And, you know, obviously we have strong ties and strong relationships, and then lots of weaker ones, particularly on a Facebook, for instance. But I think it's important that, particularly at certain times, that we are really real, not necessarily with everyone. We don't have to go public on Facebook, for instance, but that there's someone that knows the truth of our life in any given moment. Because it's those things that we sometimes struggle to share, that we might feel embarrassed about or ashamed about, particularly in the realm of mental illness. Someone shared with me the other day that they're having anxiety, that they said, I've had anxiety attacks. They said, I've never had anxiety attacks. And I said, I remember having an anxiety attack a few years ago. And I was so grateful that they shared that with me, because they were a bit embarrassed to say they'd had this anxiety attack. And they had no idea that I'd had an anxiety attack. And I know there's a lot of people who can struggle with that. Depression, obviously all sorts of, you know, mental health challenges. Lots of people are dealing with them. And I think we are stronger when we share, and we lower the mask that we often feel pressure to wear. All of us feel pressure to wear a mask. All of us want to look good socially. But I think when we wear a mask for too long, we can become a stranger to ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
And
thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to talk a bit about pressure and what you started to talk about a moment ago about boundaries. As you said, as women, we are often doing it all at home and at work. Now, you started to talk about setting boundaries, and I'd love to go deeper into that. How can we not just set them, but maintain those boundaries?
With constant effort and with constant willingness to risk disappointing people. And I don't like disappointing people. I am a people pleaser, and I like taking care of people. I like people feeling like I value them and I value the relationship. And yet, if all we're doing is trying to take care of everybody else's priorities, it means we sacrifice our own over time, particularly when you have a lot on your plate. And if you're living a big life and you're pursuing your highest vision for your life, then there's going to be a lot of people who want your time. And some of those people will be people you absolutely want to spend time with. And maybe sometimes you can't spend as much as you want. And other times there's people who actually you don't really want to spend your time with, but you feel you should. Yeah. And I put that word should in quotation marks, because should, and Octavia, I'm sure you're aware of the power of the word should. Should often refers to, you know, social expectations. It's what others expect of us versus what we truly want for ourselves. I should spend time with her. I went to college with her. I should go and hang out with this person because we've been doing it for a long time, or I should invite all these people over or say yes to something. And I always say, replace the word should with could and go, well, I could go and do that on the weekend, or I could, and give yourself another alternative. And it takes that judgment out. Actually, I could just sit at home and catch up on reading some books and just spend some downtime, or I could just say no to that. And it takes out that judgment that one course of action is better than the other course of action.
So let's talk about pursuing the highest vision of your life. I love that statement that you just shared. In your latest book, You've Got This, as a chapter that asks women to stop selling ourselves short and talking ourselves down.
Mm-hmm.
How can we do this?
Yeah, look, I wrote a chapter and You've Got This specifically for women, because I see so many women, thousands and thousands as I've worked around the world, selling themselves short and settling for less than what they truly want, and underestimating themselves and buying into self-doubts about who they are and what they can do. And I really believe that when we let our self-doubt call the shots, we shortchange the world. Oh, are you there? I'm just gonna okay, sorry.
Oh yes, I'm here.
Sorry, someone's trying to call me on my computer. And so when it comes to like pursuing the highest vision for your life, for many years I've run these Live Brave Women's Weekends, because I think sometimes we have to step away from the busyness of our lives to stop and just go, what is the highest vision for my one and only precious life? And that doesn't mean we can be living it like today, tomorrow, because we may be in the trenches of life and we've got a lot of things on our plate. But it's not about the destination, it's about the direction. You don't have to have a specific endpoint, and whether you ever get to a specific endpoint is actually matters so much less than you're pursuing a path that speaks to that deepest part of you that really wants to live a life that matters and leave a legacy beyond yourself, and use your gifts for the highest good. I mean, I know that right now all of you have incredible gifts, your incredible combination of talents and expertise and wisdom and knowledge and ingenuity and passion. And so often we're not operating from that place of like, what is the highest possible use of what I have to bring to the world? And we kind of settle, and we do sell ourselves short. And I can assure you there's been countless times where I've put myself out there toward what I felt called towards, and I haven't been as phenomenally successful as I would have liked to have been. And I reconcile, sometimes falling short of maybe what a goal was with I've had the courage to try. I mean, as Theodore Roosevelt, I've been in the arena and not in the stands. And so there's a real power that comes when we hold ourselves in our power and choose to say, regardless of everything on around me, regardless of what's happened in my past, regardless of what other people have said about me, or regardless of whatever labels I've even put on myself, regardless of my hardships or my past or present, I'm going to show up and pursue a life that really calls on me to be a bigger version of the person I know I have it within me to be.
So I want to ask you about a time when you used one of your gifts. So not only did you start a new role during the pandemic, you gave your first TEDx talk during the pandemic on the topic of how to be brave. And I bring that up because some of our attendees with us today may have already done this. Some of them might actually have it on their list of things they want to accomplish for their vision of their highest self. Can you tell us, how did that opportunity present itself and how did you prepare for it?
Well, actually, it didn't just present. I decided last year in the pandemic, I'd actually never bothered to pursue doing a TEDx or anything because I do a lot of speaking everywhere anyway. And someone said to me, well, I wasn't doing it for 2 years. And actually it's still building back up again, doing as much speaking at live events. And I just thought, you know what, this year I'm just going to put it out there as a goal to do a TEDx talk. And so I actually found someone to help me go, how do I even do that? And they said, well, here's where you can find out what TEDx's are on. So I literally put a proposal together and I sent it out to a bunch of different TEDx crowds. And this particular one contacted me and I'm like, the timing works. It's only 4 weeks away, but I'm just going to do
Only
it.
4 weeks? Okay.
It probably wasn't great timing in one way. But I just was like, you know what, seize the day, say yes, and just jump in. So I actually only had about a month to prepare.
Yes.
But of course, you know, I've been preparing my whole life in terms of what I knew I wanted to say. How do you be brave with your life? And so I could critique my TEDx talk till the cows come home and give you all the things that could have been.
Of course you could, because it's so personal to you.
Yeah. And I don't think it was, you know, like I am my own harshest critic, and that's one of the things I have to work on. But I just wanted to do it. I wanted to make sure it was out there, because I knew that actually life would get really busy as I've started this new role, and it has been. It's exceptionally, just incredibly busy. So I had a window of time there, and I thought, let's just do this while I'm not as busy as I know I will be in the future.
Well, congratulations for having that intention and for executing. And I thought the talk was brilliant, but I want to ask you about that self-critique part that we have, because the fear of failure can be paralyzing. Can someone learn to become more courageous? And if so, how do they start?
Watch the TEDx talk. Sorry, I maybe thought that was funnier than you did. Well, obviously, yes, as I say in the TEDx talk, your courage is a muscle. I mean, this is kind of evidence back. The more often we do things that require us to break ranks with our comfort zone, because we're wired for comfort. Mm-hmm. We're wired for safety. We're wired for security, not for risking it. So it is natural to say, I don't want to do it because I don't want to risk making a fool of myself. I don't want to risk social public humiliation. I don't think I'm good enough. What if, 3 people watch it, or, whatever. You can come up with 1,000 reasons why not. So I would start by saying, but why so? What is the why? You need a big why. What lies at stake here if you don't do it? You'll live with your whole life going, well, I never did try. In which case we failed by default. Secondly, just recognizing that the more we do anything that scares us, the braver we become. And so it might be that you go, well, I'm not going to start with a TEDx talk, but I want to just offer to give a talk at this local group that I'm part of. And I'm just going to talk for 15 minutes about something I'm passionate about. So obviously it's about doing something you're passionate about. For me, I'm just so clear. I feel really called to help people be braver. I feel particularly called in emboldening women to really own their value and their worth, and to back themselves, to make the ultimate bet, and like put a bet on yourself. But start small. Don't take on Mount Everest. Start with doing something that's a little bit scary, not absolutely terrifying. And then when you do that and you realize the ground didn't open up underneath you, you didn't fall to your death, you know what? Do something else. And like going to the gym, if the more you do it, the less painful you find it and the easier it is, and then you're ready to take on bigger and bigger weights. Well, it's the same with courage. The more you act in the presence of your fear and your self-doubts, the more you dilute the power they have over you and amplify your own sense of power. And I can assure you, Octavia, I have plenty of self-doubts. I have them all the time. I just have got better at saying, thank you, I hear, like, that's just my fear. I'm not going to let you sit in the driver's seat. I am going to do the very thing that I am afraid to do. And I have felt vulnerable so many times. Writing books is a massive act of courage, because you feel so vulnerable that you're, I know I'm not a J.K. Rowling. I know I'm not there's this absolute fear of the exposure. And actually, I remember leading up to the publication of my first book, Find Your Courage, which was 13, 14 years ago. In the lead up to that, waking up in the middle of the night, and in my mind's eye was my face on the front page of the New York Times, great big thing. And it just had this massive headline that said, world's worst author.
Oh my goodness.
And like, that would have been great publicity, really. People would have wanted to buy it just to know how badly written the world's worst author would write a book. But I share that because, like, just that fear of being exposed to the world as being inadequate And I think our fear, and particularly we women, we live in these shame stories of what we are lacking, of what we are not enough of where we are inadequate, we're not smart enough, educated enough, witty enough, strategic enough, skinny enough, beautiful enough, educated, accomplished enough. And as I wrote in, actually, and you've got this, but in Make Your Mark, there's a chapter on that, own your enoughness. I mean, and I would just ask all of you watching now, if you were really to operate from a place, there's a physiological, like stand tall and operate from a place of your own adequacy, of your own enoughness, that you have everything it takes to pursue whatever it is that sort of tugs on you. How would you show up differently? How would you engage with people differently? How would you speak differently? How would you walk into a room differently if you weren't buying into the belief system that you are lacking in some way, on some metric? And I think when we have the courage to really operate from that place of, I've got this, and I have worth to share and value to bring, different than other people's, they've got plenty too, but I have my unique, it actually just shifts our experience of life. And it shifts how people perceive us too.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. In your book, Brave, you share 10 building blocks for living bravely. And one that really resonated with me was value your opinion above all others. Can you share an example of when you've had to embody that principle and what the outcome was for you personally?
Yeah, I've done that numerous times with raising my kids.
Yeah,
I've got 4 kids, and other people have had judgments about what the right, what they should be doing, the best way to educate kids. When my oldest son was 16, we were living in Australia, and we thought we were moving back to the United States. And we sent him back to boarding school in the United States as a 16-year-old. And he was really keen to go. And he flew off on his own from Australia as a 16-year-old and came back to the area actually I'm living in now, in the DC area. And there was numerous people felt like a good parent wouldn't do that. And yet we just knew innately that he was absolutely grounded enough in himself and would be fine to do that, live so far. And I always work very hard. I focus on all of the good. I wasn't stressed about his well-being. I knew he would be fine, and he was. And yeah, at times when other people had different opinions, I'm like, you know what? I know my child, and my husband and I felt very similarly. This is going to be a wonderful opportunity for him to forge his own path and spread his wings in the world. And I've made similar decisions with all my kids at times when I know sometimes people don't even say it loud.
I feel it.
They just kind of go, oh, I don't know how I could ever do that. And you're kind of like, I know you've got a judgment on our parenting decision here. But I'm like, you know what? You raise your children how you raise your children. I just know I'm raising my children to be people, global citizens in the world, and I'm not raising them to live close to me for the rest of their life. So I mean, that's one example, but also I would say professionally for me, writing books. You've Got This is a good example. I was told I really should write a leadership book, one that's targeted to the corporate world, that strategically would be a good decision for me. But I just felt really called to write You've Got This. I just really felt that there were so many people who needed the message in there to really trust themselves more deeply, which is obviously what the subtitle is, the life-changing power of trusting yourself. And it wasn't a business strategic decision. It was really just something I felt really passionate about. And I think sometimes we have to veer off what others might say is the smartest, most strategic thing and do, well, what feels right and true for me. Yeah.
So my final question for you before we open up questions to others. You have a PhD in the interplay of gender, power, and leadership. What have you learned about your leadership style during this pandemic that you didn't know before?
Ooh, I know you told me you sent these to me ahead of time, but as I told you, I didn't read them. So, okay. It's very affiliative, which is not atypical, which is, for women, most women are tend to be more affiliative. So for me, it is about doing things together with others. and it's very grounded in a collective sense of purpose, like what can we do together, versus directive. And I think for me, even in stepping into my own power and potential, has been around just owning my strengths with people. And I think I'm quite perceptive. Well, I know I'm really perceptive and I'm very intuitive. So for me, leaning into that as a strength and my ability to read people, read a room, and sometimes pick up on something that's unspoken and unsaid that I sense is an issue that needs to be addressed. So I think this pandemic, if anything, has kind of honed that. And working virtually, and it has been difficult. Like, I love being with people. I get energy from being with people. So a little bit of me felt like I was withering on the vine a bit with Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. But I think I also just learned that, you know what, there's always opportunity to adapt and to learn. And so I think coming out the other side of it, I'm more adaptive now and able to roll with things a little bit better maybe than I would have thought I could be.
Oh, thank you, Margie. And I want to turn it back over to Alexa now, who I think is going to gather some questions that have been asked for you to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Really, really fascinating conversation so far. I'm going to pull a few questions from the chat. Also, feel free to ask additional questions or, raise your hand in the Zoom function if you'd like to come on in verbally. The first question, Margie, is really around your belief around how change happens. I think a lot of what I've heard you articulate today, which is wonderful, is around, mastering bravery and all the ways in which we can show up more powerfully at an individual level. And I know at the RSA, we often think about how change happens at three levels: at that sort of role of individual agency, the role that sort of communities and practices have, and then the role that society and institutional systems play. And so I'm just wondering how, at a core level, do you believe that sort of inner change leads to outer change, especially for so many people that find themselves maybe in institutions or in cultures that are not supportive to women? How much does that mindset shift bring about a sort of shift in the culture? And I think this really also speaks to Akira's question around the workplace and dealing with, microaggressive behaviors that we see, and, male superiors who, might be really passive aggressive to women. So just wondering your thoughts there.
Look, I think there's a mutual interplay. I think we affect our environment and we shape our environment and our environment shapes us. So there was absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that our ability to rise and fulfill our own potential is facilitated or stymied by the environment and the systems, the ones in our workplaces, but the larger socio-cultural systems that we have been raised in, that we're operating in. So it's definitely not like, oh, it's just us that holds ourselves back. No. There is, the playing field we know has been tilted against women through history. So there is definitely barriers and biases that women have to contend with, and far more complex challenges of expectations and all of the backlash and male constructions of power that we have to deal with that men haven't had to contend with. I mean, obviously they've got different challenges, but we have our own, well and truly. And so, yeah, there are microaggressions and there are biases, and all of that is absolutely real, and we know that. In fact, a report just that recently came out of it's the College of London College or something, but it was, Australia is one of the more misogynistic developed countries in the world that I grew up in a very gendered home, and where misogyny was just so normalized you didn't even think about it. And while I'm living in the US, which I'm not saying is far from perfect, it was only when I went back to Australia I realized, oh my gosh, it is way more misogynist in Australia than even in the United States. So yeah, all of that is real. But what I found in my doctoral studies is that obviously we can't always change all the system around us, and we're not straight away. But the way we grow our power to actually change some of those bigger structural factors is by first owning our power. And I think it was Tony Child said, the biggest way we give away our power is believing we don't have any. So starting with really owning your own agency. And that doesn't mean you don't have people who may be playing you small, sidelining you. There may be backlash when you embody some of, your own strengths because you're not conforming to feminine gender norms, but really showing up as someone who is empowered and not going to be defined by the little snide comment. And in my doctoral studies, the women that I interviewed very much were like, I don't want to be defined by my gender. I will use my gender to my benefit when the opportunity arises, and sometimes it does, but I will not be defined by it. And when I'm sitting at a table, I'm not there as a female leader or a female sales manager or a female CMO or whatever. I'm there as whatever role I'm in. And I happen to be a woman, and I'm going to own my femininity. I'm not going to downplay it, but I'm also mindful I'm in an environment, and sometimes we have to dial things up and dial things down. And that really helps to grow the power. But also a key thing is not to look, I remember a few people saying, don't look to be slighted and don't look to take offense. All of them dealt with sexism, all of them dealt with misogyny, but don't let someone else's comment deeply offend you. I mean, okay, they're saying that it says a lot more about them than it does about me. I'll call stuff out. I'll be, I'm not going to cower, but I'm also not going to overly personalize and internalize somebody else's stuff and their own limited bias, blinkers, perhaps sexist thinking. So I think, what is it to hold yourself in your power? It's to not give it away to others, what other people say and what other people think, or to the microaggressions. They're there. There may be the right way to call them out, but don't let them, get inside you. And if you're in a really bad, toxic environment, leave it. Don't stay in it if you cannot flourish in that environment and it's so ingrained and systemic without the leaders there who are committed to changing it. Well, then maybe it's environment you need to leave.
Wonderful, thank you. There are two questions that came through just while you were sharing in terms of leadership. And so one is really around the attributes that make a brave leader. Whether it's in the workplace or community or personal lives. And then the other question is around leadership that's inspired you. Who are the leaders that you've looked up to that have modeled some of these approaches that you've learned from the most?
Yeah. I mean, the attributes of a brave leader is someone who's willing to lay their vulnerability on the line for the sake of a cause bigger than themselves. They lay their vulnerability on the line, their pride on the line, their ego on the line, their reputation on the line, and they'll do what's right even if it risks costing them in some way. They're taking risks. Not everything's going to land. They're risking failure. They're risking looking foolish, and they're sharing their journey with others too. And I've written about this pretty extensively. If you kind of look up brave leaders, my name on forums, there's a lot of articles on that. And in actually my book, Stop Playing Safe, I write a lot about leadership in there. As for people who've inspired me, you know what? It's generally, often it is women. I mean, it's not just women, men. I mean, Abraham Lincoln is a US president I was incredibly inspired by because he always had he had a deep, deep, deep empathy for the suffering that his decisions were creating and the loss of life, etc. And I think that's a sign of brave leaders. They don't take lightly the impact of their decisions. They feel deeply. They're not kind of numb. They're not, too tough. But I would also, like various leaders throughout history who even today, I have looked, and I know it can be very contentious. Sometimes people don't like her, Angela Merkel. I think is a woman who has very much just owned herself. She hasn't tried to be like anyone. She's just done what she has felt is right, regardless of the criticisms that have come at her. Oprah is, I know it gets cliched, but there's a woman who has been not defined by her circumstances and who's continually walked her own truth. There's many, even in the workplace, there's different people who've exhibited brave leadership. Doesn't mean I like all the traits that they've exhibited, but they've been bold and they've been visionary. And there's a lot of the big names we know. I got to spend 5 days with Richard Branson a few years ago. And again, not everybody likes him, but he's taken a lot of risks, and at this point in his career is very focused on how does he leave the world better. Some question the business decisions he's done in the past, but I just think people who haven't been let what others want them to do define them, and have been willing to blaze a path that is uncertain.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really inspiring list there. I know we have a hard stop, so just want to ask one final question. But what one ritual or practice would you leave us with here today? If there's something that we could just start doing after this call or tomorrow morning, that could help us really embody some of these principles that you're talking about.
Look, to me, starting your day strong, like start your day intentionally. And for me, I read, I'll call it wisdom literature. Every morning I'll make a cup of tea and I'll sit and read something that really speaks to my spiritual self, and that really aligns with who I want to be and kind of fuels my sense of purpose. That's a really big one for me. Writing in a journal, and also daily exercise. I'm not an exercise freak or anything like that, but if I move my body every morning, I have a better day. So there's 3 ones quickly.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Octavia. Really appreciate this discussion today. And just as a reminder, these salons are regularly curated around themes that our fellows bring to us. So they're co-designed between us and the fellowship. And so if there's ever a topic that you'd love to see us investigate, a speaker you'd love to invite into the RSA fold, feel free to reach out to myself or Claire. We really look forward to these conversations and appreciate your time today. Thank you again to our speakers.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Beautiful. Take care, people.